Okay, I'll make a start. I think people are probably still joining for another minute or two, but um, we'll make a start because we really want to get into the discussion and see where the conversation takes us. So, um, without further ado, obviously we launched our digital connectivity survey last year, and we had quite a good take up to that. It was reasonably well received. We followed that up this year with our second connectivity survey. We actually got more responses this year, which is a positive thing. So people obviously did find it useful. So what today's discussion is around, just to talk about some of the key findings from that, and then really to just pick on a couple of key strands from what we've heard, both from the responses that we got to the survey itself, but also we had a number of follow-up conversations with individuals after the survey, just to try and draw out a little bit more detail as to why some of the answers had been given, what the general feeling was, where, particular successes and challenges still remain. So with that, obviously this, just a bit of housekeeping, this session is being recorded, and please turn off your camera if you're not a speaker, and please put your microphone on mute. There will be an opportunity for question and answers later on in the session, and when the discussion starts, obviously we would recommend a gallery view so you can see everyone who's talking. We will circulate a recording after the session, which is why we're recording it, of course, for those who aren't able to join today. So we'll do introductions properly after I've run through a couple of slides, but obviously I'm Steve Smith, I'm Principal Consultant, and I lead the Smart Places practice within FarrPoint, and have been heavily involved in the survey. We've got with us today Deja Arthur from Swansea-based City Deal. We've got Heather Clark from City of Wolverhampton Council, Stacey McCady from South London Partnership, and James Pocock from Dumfries and Galloway Council. And so we have a good spread of geographies, both urban and rural, kind of north and south. We've tried to make sure we've got a really balanced panel, which I'm sure will be reflected in the discussions. But I'll let them all introduce themselves after we've gone through a couple of slides. So about the survey, as I've already said, this is our second survey. We pride ourselves at FarrPoint in being completely independent. We're not aligned to any of the mobile operators, any of the fixed telecoms providers. We're not, we work predominantly across the public sector, so we feel we've got really good insight. And that's, why we see the value in doing this, because we think it's useful for people to hear, how others are doing, where they're having successes, where they might still have challenges, and to really let people share that progress that's being made, and make some of those connections. And we reached out to over 150 local authorities from across all 4 nations of the UK, and got responses from all of those. This survey itself captured things across strategy and planning, barriers to deployment, the importance of gigabit, the role of 5G, smart places, the various switch offs, whether that's PSTN, 2G, 3G, etc. And then connectivity and reducing emissions as part of that drive towards net zero. So what did we find? Well, the kind of key thing that we asked was, where had there been progress in 2023? And unsurprisingly, because of commercial deployment, which is going all out to get as many places covered as possible alongside Project Gigabit, we saw more areas covered by gigabit broadband as the highest of what's been done over the last year, or what's been seen. More areas covered by 4G came in a close second. We actually had, people would noted that there was an increase in adoption of that connectivity as well over the last year. Interestingly, 5G was much lower down, so maybe that says something about where 5G is being rolled out. Maybe that's still constrained to the more urban areas and isn't getting too far beyond that. Smart places and IoT, there obviously is a lot of work happening in that area, but again, maybe because of where that's happening, that was much lower down in where progress had been seen across the whole UK. And net zero, slightly surprisingly, was still the area where there'd been the least kind of progress seen. despite it being a really important topic, and really something that we're all supposed to be working towards. So with that in mind, we then look forward to, ask people what are their priorities for the coming year. And you'll see we've got on the graphic there where those things ranked last year in the survey and where they ranked this year. And there was absolutely no change, I have to say, in what people's priorities were. And there was a new one that we added to the survey, which is why there's a new entry at number 5. But all that did was bump smart places in net zero down a place, and that's slotted in, as I say, at number 5. So people are still focused on getting more gigabit broadband to the places where it hasn't reached yet, and whether that's through commercial deployment or public intervention. Where that isn't possible, people are still really focused on making sure that residents and businesses have at least super fast connectivity available to them, so that no one's fully left behind. And then 4G is still seen as a slightly higher priority for the coming year over 5G, which we'll have a bit of a chat about. And then encouraging take-up is also seen as a priority. Obviously, lots of connectivity is now out there. You see the percentages from Ofcom and Think Broadband and others to show that we are well on the way to reaching that 85% target by 2025, although not everywhere, it should be noted. So now, people are looking to see, well, actually, how do we make best use of that connectivity? So that's a new feature for this year. So without me talking at length about the rest of the findings, because I'd much rather we got into a discussion and talk through some of the key elements, I'll just ask the panelists to quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the proper discussion, if that's okay. So I'll just go in the order that we're shown on the screen. Obviously, I've already introduced myself. So Deja, over to you.
Hi, yeah, I'm Deja Oliver, Project Manager on the Swansea Bay Citydale Digital Infrastructure Programme. We're a partnership across Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire, Swansea and Neath-Port Talbot. And that's the 4 local authorities, the 2 universities and the 2 health boards within the region. And we're tackling everything that's within your survey across 3 quite distinct work streams. So thank you for asking me to join you today.
Thank you very much, Deja. And Heather, over to you.
My name's Heather Clark. I'm the Head of Digital Projects at the City of Wolverhampton Council. So my small team deal with delivering the digital Wolverhampton strategy, which includes infrastructure, but also inclusion, innovation and economy.
Great. And Stacey.
Hi, I'm Stacey. I am the digital champion for South London Partnership. So there are 4 of me across London, all funded directly by GLA and the infrastructure and coordination team. And we help support the boroughs on their digital infrastructure and connectivity plans.
Well, Stacey, there's a great thought. And last but not least, James.
Hi there, James Pocock, Dumfries and Galloway Council. Part of my role here is the main point of contact for both the UK and Scottish Government's digital connectivity programmes, and I also support colleagues in our regional deal, comprising of Scottish Borders Council, Northumberland Council and the 2 Cumbria councils, with the digital elements of the regional deal as well.
Fantastic. So I'm going to stop sharing all of our lovely pictures now, and we'll get into the discussion proper, if that's okay. So one of the things that came out in the survey was lots of local authorities or regions, whether that's through a city deal, region deal, combined authority, etc. Lots of places have a digital infrastructure strategy or are developing one. Why do we think that's important? What message does that send? What does it enable within the organisation? Why do we need a digital strategy, and what benefits can that bring? So who do I ask first? Let's go with Heather, because you're top of my screen. What do you think, Heather?
Well, for us, we adopted our digital infrastructure strategy back in January 2020. And I think one of the key reasons why it is important is in order to sort of drive digital infrastructure across your area, you need commitment from a range of council departments, so from planning, street works, assets. And that sort of reinforces that commitment. It gives high level buy-in, it gives councillor buy-in in order to really, really encourage them to reduce those barriers. Because without that barrier busting activity, I don't think definitely from our view, from our council's view, we wouldn't have made the progress we've made on the rollout of digital infrastructure. And on the back of that, we actually saw such a lot of progress in the first few years. We've actually now adopted a digital Wolverhampton strategy, which is broader than that and includes in particular innovation. So we're now utilising the progress made with future-proof digital infrastructure to support a smart city and innovations in service delivery.
Yeah, well, obviously I agree with all of that, and I guess, Stacey, I know, you know, there's an event down in London tomorrow. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that, because that kind of fits really well with this whole topic, doesn't it? You know, why is a strategy important?
Yeah, so a lot of the councils in London have got digital strategies, but they didn't focus solely on the infrastructure deployment. So myself and the boroughs in East London were awarded funding to actually commission a report for digital infrastructure in particular. So this is, I suppose, setting out recommendations as to how to get the buy-in. So a lot of people want funding from central government or funding from operators to put a digital champion in place. Now, that's never usually going to happen. So we try and look at it from a different perspective and try and get the councils and the boroughs to understand that if you have that buy-in from the top down, so whether it be an elected member, whether it be your chief executive, and if they understand the importance of digital connectivity and how it's going to improve the sort of prosperity of their borough, you tend to get more traction and more buy-in. So as long as that message is going from the top down, that seems to be where we can become sort of a borough that's easy to do business with, because that opens doors for the operators to come to the sort of the mini dig groups, gives us a bit of a forum to kind of talk about challenges, opportunities, investment strategies. The DSIT flexi permit work, we can have more open conversations about that. So the sort of digital infrastructure work that's going on is going to be showcased at the telecoms event in London tomorrow, where we're kind of launching that, and it's kind of been headed up by Theo Blackwell, our sort of chief digital officer in London. So it seems to be the areas of London that get the most investment, as you can all imagine, is going to be central London, where the big businesses are, where it's busiest. South and East London have kind of been almost forgotten about. All the operators don't build there. There's the scale back of the altnets. So really we're trying to get the boroughs to be more proactive and engage in the market and opening their doors. And like Heather said, having those different directorates, economic development, planning, all talking to the operators, telling them where their next investment in regen areas are going to be, and then asking them really nicely to put some council inducting down so they don't have to redig payments again. So that's really the strategy and the areas that we're focusing on right now.
Great. And James, I guess, you know, you're in quite a different geography. You know, it's you're certainly not in London. You know, there are obviously some urban areas within your patch, but there are lots of rural areas. What does a digital strategy, you know, mean for you guys? And I get from your introduction, and obviously we know each other reasonably well. You know, you have a couple of different strands. So you've got, you know, your own council area. You've also then got, as you said, the Borderlands area. You've got, you know, some wider kind of stuff around Scotland. So how does the digital strategy, you know, navigate its way through that, and what is the benefit, you know, of having that? Yeah,
so within the council, we have an overarching digital strategy, which absolutely acknowledges the importance of good infrastructure. You know, without the infrastructure, we can't deliver all the other elements of our strategy around about learning, around about the digital council, and supporting economic development. So it sits within that. We don't have a dedicated piece focusing solely on infrastructure, but as Stacey and others have said, you know, internally we absolutely recognise the need to be a little bit more kind of coherent and joined up in how we deal with people that wish to invest across the region, and how we kind of present the council as an advocate for infrastructure investment, whether that be to government or to the private sector as well. Interestingly, you know, within the regional deal, when that was being pulled together back in 2018, digital infrastructure was a key component of that. That was before things like Shared Rural Network kind of kicked off, Project Gigabit. So there was a lot of intention around about direct investment across the Borderlands area. Now since then, the world has kind of moved on, and as you said, we're kind of navigating a different kind of landscape around that, and we're waiting to see how some of these big infrastructure programs deliver across certainly the southwest of Scotland, the south of Scotland, and the wider Borderlands area, and then try and understand, well, actually, where do we perhaps need to have more coherent conversations around about infrastructure and how we might address those.
Great. And last but not least, Deja, obviously you have, again, slightly different context in the work that you do around the city deal, etc. Again, how does a kind of strategy sit within that, and why is it important for the work that you guys do?
Just picking up on James' point then, each of our local authorities have got a digital strategy, and infrastructure isn't separated out either. It kind of cuts through everything, and within the city deal, certainly the infrastructure programme underpins. It's the foundation piece for a lot of the other projects that fall out of that. And we're quite fortunate because we've got revenue funding. We've been able to allocate resources into each of those local authorities to support delivery of the Shared Rural Network and Project Gigabit, and then work really closely with us as a team to identify where there's local need. So that's how it's tied in, but from a strategic perspective, we haven't separated it out. We've seen it very much as an integral part of our strategies.
And you've just provided me a fantastic segue into my kind of follow-up question, which is, having those strategies is great, and I think lots of people will appreciate the reasons why having a strategy is important, so you can get that senior buy-in, and you've got something that you can pin your aspiration to, and drive investment, attract investment, etc. But who delivers that? There's lots of talk about digital champions. There's also lots of talk about that meaning different things to different people. You have digital champions who focus on digital exclusion. You've got people who are the really most senior people, whether that's the leader of a council or a chief exec, who might be a digital champion, and going and banging the drum and making the right noises to support that work. But then you've also got the people who are at the kind of coalface, for want of a better term, who have to make some of those barriers disappear and help overcome them, and help have some of those conversations. So do you think it is important to have that kind of digital champion role, or a group of roles? Do you think that a strategy can be delivered without them? What do you think? Stacey, I'll start with you. Obviously, I appreciate you guys, in many senses fit those titles. So what do you think, Stacey?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned at the start of the call, we're funded directly by the GLA. So I cover the South London boroughs, and then we have one for Central, one for East, and one for West. So we're there to sort of be a kind of coordinator between the private sector operators down into the different departments in the council. So whether that be from a 5G perspective, and the sort of the planning and the pre-app fees, all the way through to sort of the Project Gigabit side of things in BD UK. So yeah, London seems to be, there's a big misconception that London's this big hub and it's well connected, but I think we're working with BD UK, and with the OMR data, even after the following 3 years of commercial deployment, there's still going to be over 300,000 prems without gig capable connectivity. So it's really something that we're having to work with the boroughs and say, we need to be more proactive in doing this. And that digital champion role, yeah, we're kind of high level covering across various different councils, but in each borough, I think it's been set up really well in West Berkshire. I know Lynn does a really good job of setting up these mini dig groups with all different, and having those leads then come into the sort of the county level. I think that's worked really well, so each person feels that they've got, each district and borough feel that they've got their own sort of working group that really focuses in on that investment piece.
Yeah. Deja?
Yeah, very similar. So we identified we need two completely separate roles. They work really closely together, but there's the relationship management role, which deals very much on the barrier busting side, and the focus varies between the authorities. So, more rural counties, that's focused on SRN delivery and targeting non-super fast premises, and then in Swansea and Neath, it's more around open access agreements, and so it's quite different. But they meet with suppliers regularly. and both governments. And then our broadband engagement officers are right there at the coalface, working with our communities and businesses and trying to make what is very complex seems as easy to understand as possible. We've also recognised comms plays a huge role in this. So we've recently appointed a comms officer within our team to support all of that in terms of delivery.
Yeah. And is this the same, James, for you, or that hasn't necessarily been the same kind of digital champions network until reasonably recently in some parts of Scotland? But what do you think?
No, I think it varies from local authority to local authority. In Scotland, whether that kind of infrastructure kind of responsibility sits within an economic development kind of place, or with my own authority. Actually, I'm within the IT department, but that's just a legacy from a previous role in a previous life that's there, and it's not a dedicated role. So I said at the start, this is just part of my kind of day job. But why it's important, and you kind of alluded to it at the start around about that political buy-in and senior leadership. That's absolutely kind of bought in, and my role really is kind of just being that single point of contact and having the overview internally around about what colleagues in planning are kind of dealing with from the operator's perspective, where some of their challenges are with roads and streets, and just trying to facilitate some of that. So it's less of a public-facing role as an advocate and a champion for digital and digital infrastructure. It's more that kind of behind the scenes kind of facilitation kind of role, and just trying to smooth that deployment and eliminate some of the barriers that might be in the way of deployment.
Yeah. But I know you and the team, obviously you mentioned, do good work. You guys are fortunate to be pretty well covered these days. Do you think that would have happened if you hadn't had that kind of dedicated focus of people kind of helping drive that forward, or do you think that it would have happened anyway? Was it always going to happen?
No, I don't believe so. I think our starting point, we had less full fibre than most rural areas, and there was no commercial plans to upgrade. One of the first things we did was identify a digital champion who's very senior level, our director of strategy. So she oversees the digital programme, but most importantly, she unblocks the barriers when we face them. I was appointed as the digital coordinator. This was in addition to my existing role, but the council did invest in a small digital team to support this agenda. What we also did, which I thought was has been very useful, is we've got a cabinet member for digital. So we've got a councillor championing this agenda and sort of pushing it through at that level. I think without that commitment, without that commitment to having those positions, and without our proactive approach to barrier busting and supporting the rollout, we wouldn't be in the position we are today.
So kind of moving on then from, we understand why a strategy is important. We understand, that people need to get behind that and help actually, make some of that happen. One of the other things that we heard from our survey was that there was quite a lot of focus on finding ways to connect those people who hadn't been reached yet. And I'm interested, Stacey, in what you said, because that 300,000 premises, let's be honest, that is a reasonable sized city anywhere else in the country. 300,000 premises, and if you had a whole city somewhere that was going to not be connected, that there would be questions asked. But appreciating that they will not be in a nice, neat, discreet section of London that you can go and
no, of course not. Which is why operators from the legacy build, they've done one side of a street and left 4 houses at the top, not done the other side of the street, and trying to get someone to assemble a gang of men and go and dig up that, those 4 houses and lay that fibre. That's never going to happen. It's not commercially viable. And what we've noticed, and I'm sure it's across the UK, but there's a lot of scale back, there's a lot of consolidation in the market. They can't get the investment to build. They're all trying to sweat the assets that are already in the ground to get the return on that. So the big focus for those operators, or a lot of them, will be just trying to get people onto their network, away from the kind of duopoly players and onto the altnets. But we've noticed that there's been scale back in builds. People aren't meeting the commitments to their way leave agreements. The social value elements of that have all been kind of fallen by the wayside and forgotten about. And actually, a lot of the teams dealing with that have actually been made redundant now from the altnets. So it's really kind of a rock and a hard place where we need the big players to come in and do it, but we're, you know, a lot of them are at that, we're at the mercy of them cherry picking what's commercially viable and what suits them. So, which is why we've said to the boroughs, we need to be more proactive in engagement. We have to have that elected member. We have to really drive that from the top down and have those meetings at a more kind of senior levels to say why this is important. And, you know, with the PSTN switch off happening and 2G, 3G switch off, and I think it's, there's a lot of prems that will be left, and we just need to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind. So even if they don't have that full fibre, what are we going to do? How are we going to get them up? And, you know, we have various intervention options available to councils. You know, do you want to build your own fibre ducting and lease that out to the market and try and make that as a point of revenue in? Do you want to do a joint venture the way Digital Greenwich have done? You know, or do you want to just maybe put some funding up front and see who can match that? And although you won't own it, you won't make any money from it, at least you're doing something to invest in the areas in your borough that won't have that.
Yeah. So do you think there is a bit of a misconception still that, you know, historically people have always thought that those, you know, prems that aren't reached yet are in the kind of remote rural areas. It's someone who's, you know, miles away, you know, up at the head of a valley or whatever. And, you know, we all know on this call, and I'm sure others know on this call, that's not really the case. There are pockets of people who've been missed all over the place. I mean, Heather, what's that look like? You know, are you seeing similar to what Stacey's saying in London? Are there, you know, little urban pockets all over the place?
Yeah, definitely. We've obviously, as I've said, we've achieved 74 coverage of full fibre, but we're seeing the same thing where people are now scaling back. They're now, for example, one of the companies we work with are no longer going to sort of enable the multi-dwelling units, which is, we adopted the blockway leave to try and facilitate that. So that's a bit of a knockback. But what we found out, there is a number, you know, there's quite a lot of areas within urban areas where it's not commercially viable to upgrade. So if we're not careful, those areas will end up being locked out. And some of those areas don't even get super fast broadband because they have been locked out and not commercially viable. So we need to look at a solution on this. And this is one of the reasons we're particularly concerned that Lot 35 of Project Gigabyte, which is the lot that would have covered Birmingham and Black Country and filled those not spots, isn't going ahead at the moment. So we need to look at a solution to connecting those areas that will otherwise be locked out and miss out on the opportunities that gigabyte connections bring.
Yeah. And Deja, what do you see? Are you seeing again kind of a real mixed bag in terms of where those pockets of people who haven't been reached and might not be reached are?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got two quite rural counties within our region. So unsurprisingly, the highest number of non-superfast whites premises are in Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire. So that's our focus in terms of our own infill procurement. But absolutely, we don't want to see people in our urban areas left behind either. I think, although things are being scaled back, those relationships with the suppliers in our urban areas are being quite fruitful in helping to address some of those. We do tend to have more overbuild in our urban areas. It really, our focus in terms of connecting people with really bad broadband is in our more rural parts of the counties, but getting fibre to those premises is, you know, it's not practical. So we're having to be technology agnostic in our approach. And even then with the topology, fixed wireless access isn't necessarily the best approach either. So that's a challenge in itself. And combining multiple data sets to try and get a true picture is also proving to be a challenge.
Yeah, and that's something we have heard quite a lot, that actually, although there's a lot of data out there, you know, getting accurate data, getting data that's, you know, accessible, that can be used to try and, you know, really nail down where those remaining not spots are, you know, is maybe not quite as easy as it should be. James, obviously things are slightly different in Scotland. You know, you had the kind of the Reaching 100 programme, you know, things, you know, were delivered in a slightly different way. Do you see similar challenges in terms of, you know, those who are not going to be connected to gigabit? You know, are they all rural? You know, have you got urban patches as well, or, you know, what do you think?
No, absolutely. I think you know, the example that Stacey gave about, you know, one half of a street being done, in some of our small market towns, and the other half still being kind of missed out, it is absolutely kind of relevant. But as you say, our expectation is that programs such as R100 that are in delivery just now will address some of that, but there still will be premises. They won't all be nicely on block. We're seeing some of that at the moment. But I think the point that was just made around about access to data, that's one of the really most frustrating things for me. We absolutely know it exists. How we've had engagement and consultations run about very hard to reach if somebody hadn't done some analysis and been able to pull this together. So we know it exists. We know people have done work around about this, particularly in governments. But that ability to share that and take advantage of local knowledge, I think is what's been a little bit kind of disappointing.
And do you think, I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep us moving along. But do you think, local deployment challenges was the thing that came through overwhelmingly from everyone who responded to the survey as the biggest barrier still to deployment? Do you think that it is still those local deployment challenges? Whether that's kind of way leaves, whether that's highways or roads noticing, whether it's planning for a mast. Do you think that is still the thing that's causing the biggest holdup, or because it sounds a little bit, from what Heather and Stacey have said, that actually it's not necessarily those issues alone. Maybe it is, that actually it's not really very commercially viable to go back to it, half a street and dig up the other side, or actually maybe there is a scaling back of deployment at the minute because people are looking to, get better take up on what they've already invested in, rather than continuing to just dig away and put new stuff in. What do you think, Stacey?
Yeah, I think from the fibre perspective, I think what Heather said at the beginning about a lot of the barrier busting has been kind of dealt with regards to, from a fibre perspective. Yes, in London there's a lot of private landlords, which can be really tricky to do, but understanding how we can even just build to the front door of that would definitely be a step forward rather than just ignoring it completely, because I think eventually you will get that permission. From a mobile perspective, yes, I'd still say there's a lot of issues there with regards to pre-app fees that are a bit of a sticking point from mobile operators, mainly because, one, they're all different across London, so every borough has a different pre-app fee. They also provide a different value for that fee. So it doesn't mean to say that just because you're the most expensive one, you'll get the most amount of value for it, or you'll get, site visits, or you'll get any more information out of that planning department than you would do if somebody that's half the price. So I think trying to mend the bad blood between planning departments and mobile operators, and I'm not saying either one are right or either one are wrong, but it's also a lot to do with just the trade-off, because let's be honest, 5G masts are quite ugly to look at. And I know it sounds ridiculous because nobody really notices lampposts anymore until your dog pees on one when you're walking down the street, but they're just part of everyday life. So I'm sure it'll get to a point where 5G masts will be the same, but right now, I don't so much think it's that sort of myth health busting. I don't think anyone thinks that they're passing out COVID or they're reading anyone's minds anymore. I mean, you'll get the odd person that thinks that, but in general, I don't really think that's what's stopping them. I think it's just nobody wants them outside of their house. They think it devalues the property, and in parts of London, that's a real strong point. So when you have that mass come in and it's not quite where it wants to be, that's when the fight starts and people start using their code powers and it goes to tribunal. And so I think there's still a lot of work to be done on the mobile perspective.
Yeah. Deja, would you echo that from a rural perspective? Do you think that, lots of the barriers have kind of been overcome for fixed deployment? It doesn't necessarily mean it's always commercially viable still, but, do you think that there's less issues with, roads and noticing and all those things? And do you think it is more, mobile and planning that's an issue still?
I think those issues are being overcome. I know without having the resources we've got in Carmarthenshire, the shared rural network most of those have gone through planning now. I think that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have that resource in place to take our teams through it and explain, again, taking it to a very senior level into members to explain the benefits of the shared rural network and that early engagement with communities. In Pembrokeshire, I know that they've actually, from within their digital team, also funded a highways officer to deal specifically with fibre deployments. So there's still a lot of work ongoing, but yes, we're reaching the point now where it is starting to slow down because it is becoming less commercially viable.
I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to move us along if that's okay. And an hour never ever quite seems enough. And I'm going to jump actually to a question on 5G. So there was a real mix of opinions in the survey. And for those of you who maybe read the report, you'll see that the opinions were almost equally divided down the middle as to those who thought 5G was really important for either the local authority themselves, for their own service delivery, or for the economic benefit and residents who live there, versus those who thought actually that's not a priority, and those who thought actually it was more important to have 4G versus those who thought we'll just leapfrog 4G and go 5G. What do you think about that? Do you think that it's because is there still some lack of evidence, I suppose, as to what the real benefits of 5G are over just being faster connectivity for people who've got a 5G phone? Or do you think that actually in absence of that, it would be much better if everyone just had really good 4G, because there are still areas that don't have either coverage or capacity is obviously an issue as well. It's not just about coverage. What do you think about that, Heather? Can I start with you?
Yeah, well, I think we recognise the benefit of 5G. So working with WM5G, who were, I have to say, essential in helping us understand telecoms and putting the systems in place, we've been very proactive, and we've now got 60% of our city where all operators are sort of have a coverage of 5G. But actually, it's not just about 5G, it's adding capacity to the 4G network. And what we're tending to find now is actually the demand for capacity is not being met. So we've got very slow coverage in certain areas. So not only does it adds capacity to the 4G network so you can meet that demand, but it's also opening up opportunities in the future for more sort of innovative ways of delivering services. And we've had some really sort of impressive use cases taking place in sort of Wolverhampton, including remote diagnostic between a GP and a care home, for example, which was brilliant during sort of the COVID time. But there is a lot of opportunities, but it is about increasing capacity to the 4G network, but also opening up the opportunities that 5G can bring going forward.
Deidre, I'll come to you next if I can. Obviously you've got a real mix of geography. Is it the same? Is there a one size fits all? Do you want 5G everywhere, or actually, is it better 4G first and then 5G?
Yeah, no, it varies from each of the counties. When we were looking at 5G innovation regions, which we actually didn't end up submitting a bid for, we met with a lot of the key stakeholders across the entire region, and they could all see the opportunities, but their timelines didn't quite fit. So we were about 6 months away from being able to deliver some really strong use cases. But it was broader than just 5G. So we've got a LoRaWAN network in place. We're looking at some Starlink solutions. So it's looking at advanced wireless networks alongside it. And we're there, but I would say predominantly it's about the capacity and enhancing 4G coverage primarily first.
James, how do things sit where you are?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarity in conversation from when we first started the super fast deployment. It was less about speed and more about stable and reliable. And I think that's what people are asking for across the region. We would rather have a stable and reliable phone signal that allows them to conduct business as they travel through and across the region, and we just don't have that in places at this point in time. I think on the 5G element as well, I think to me that's a classic case of technology kind of blinding the opportunity that's there. I think our focus at the moment and a lot of the use cases we're kind of looking at in terms of a better use of digital aren't necessarily reliant at this stage on 5G, on that kind of high bandwidth credit capacity kind of conversation or speed. It is more about LoRaWAN. It is more about different opportunities that will come. But for us just now, I think there are other technologies that we're kind of looking at.
Yeah, and Stacey. obviously London is a slightly different beast in that it's, you know, very, very dense.
Yeah.
You know, has some slightly different deployment challenges. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is to do with capacity issues in London. And that changes obviously quite a lot as well as to, you know, whether it's what's going on and where people are. But yeah, probably a bit like Deja was saying, it's been able to do both in tandem at the same time almost. It's getting that 4G. I wouldn't say one's stopped to cover all 4G and then we go. I think it's just there's going to be different areas, and there's a lot of notice to quits in London as well, which people get left, right and centre, so they need to take masts down and buildings are getting revamped, etc., because there's property being developed. So yeah, it's a bit of a challenge in London, but if anyone's been at London Bridge and you've got the 5G signal on your phone, you can't do anything with it. So it's definitely more capacity. The coverage is there, it's capacity that's the real problem. It's getting enough space and enough people to put the masts on.
Yeah, and kind of, you know, moving on, and you know, this might be one of the things that helps with some of that, you know, well coverage, you know, and maybe capacity. Just thinking about some of the switch offs, obviously, you know, the 2G, 3G switch off, you know, that capacity, whether, as I say, whether that's, you know, going to give slightly better coverage because of the spectrum, or whether it's, you know, going to give slightly increased bandwidth, you know, by using it to supplement the 4G, 5G, you know, might be beneficial. But with the switch offs more generally, you know, the analog or PSTN switch off, you know, 2G, 3G in slightly longer time frame, copper switch off. Do you think that, you know, are you seeing any kind of local impact from that? Do you think that people, you know, are aware of it in enough detail? You know, are you seeing any kind of, you know, I guess issues of where that's happening and people haven't been quite aware, or you know, where people are concerned about it happening? And what do you think needs to be done to make sure that is as smooth a process, as pain-free as it possibly can be? I'll start with you, James.
I don't think we're seeing much kind of commentary at all, if I'm being honest. The local authority itself is kind of doing a lot of work in that space around about telecare, around about transport and some other elements where we have to kind of make changes to accommodate the switch off. But I think for a lot of people, it's kind of going under the radar. What really kind of brings it out, and colleagues in other parts of Scotland have kind of seen it, is when we've had the storms and we see the telephone network kind of go out, and then, you know, that kind of starts to kind of bring it up to people's kind of attention when they start to realise, you know, the future, what that kind of looks and feels like, and how does telephony operate in that kind of digital environment or not. But it's not something that we see a lot of questions or queries on. It's not something that we see or have seen or been asked to be involved with in terms of awareness raising across the general public. It's kind of just going under the radar from our perspective at this point.
I guess, you know, you're in quite a different environment. Do you see, you know, is there much chatter about the switch offs? Obviously, you know, as James says, the councils will be doing stuff with their own systems, but, you know, more generally, do you see much chatter about it?
Yeah, I would definitely say the two biggest topics that my boroughs speak about, and a lot of the East London ones, is Project Gigabit. So where's the intervention from the government, and PSTN switch off. So our Chief Digital Officer, Theo Blackwell, has set up a PSTN working group. So all the boroughs in London have nominated and allocated, ring-fenced a team, or at least one or two people, to look at the auditing of not just the sort of internal systems, so like James said, sort of the telecare, adult social care, and their own lines. A lot of councils are actually finding they're now saving money because they were paying legacy lines to buildings that they'd sold off 15, 20 years ago. So every cloud.
Yeah.
I think one of the ways that they're having problems is probably the communication out to residents. And there's obviously been the announcement that they'll be kind of delaying the switch off for the more vulnerable residents. But the problem is that only the councils really know who those vulnerable residents are. And we've got these data sharing agreements, and some of the councils are quite hesitant to sign the data sharing agreements, and it's with each individual communication provider. So there's a lot of talk about that. Theo set up this base camp, which is kind of like a big MSN chat where, you know, we have once a month like hour-long calls, and we have Openreach and BT and Vodafone and everyone come on. We have Lottie, etc., come on to support, but it's also just, it's an open forum for people to ask questions and compare costs and fees as to that. But I think use the council tax bills, so sending out council tax bills and putting the columns on that bill, not as a leaflet inside it, but actually as a header on it, and with a phone number to contact anyone if they feel like they need to be that. And I think it's working with the councils to identify those vulnerable users that they deem vulnerable, and we're able to help work with the operators on that one. But yeah, it is one of the biggest topics in London, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah. And Heather, what, you know, is it being talked about? Is there much chatter in Wolverhampton? And I'm interested in, you know, one of the bits of feedback we got is SMEs seem particularly unsure about what's happening and how it might impact them. You know, maybe those companies who aren't quite big enough to have a dedicated IT or telephony kind of function, but still need IT, and, you know, they still need some of those systems to operate. You know, do you see much chatter about that?
Well, our main focus really has probably been on the customers we support through telecare. So we've been trying to push out clear messaging to inform residents about the digital switchover. So we've got a media campaign to urge residents to check what they need to do. We're also promoting drop-in sessions for residents to seek guidance to prepare for the switch off. One of the things that we've done is we've actually entered into those non-disclosure agreements with providers to enable us to target those residents that will be affected. But we recognise we do need to take proactive steps to support the residents, especially those with additional care and support needs. But one concern is that it's quite resource intensive, and depending upon the speed of the rollout, whether we'll have the capacity to support those residents in line with that speed. We've also had a bit of misinformation about the switch off, so residents being told it's due to the council, which is something we've tried to address. In terms of the SMEs, I think we need to do more work with our enterprise department to raise that profile, but it is an area that probably needs a bit more sort of pushing out there and communication outside of the council sort of communication channels to ensure it reaches everyone who needs to know.
And Deja, how's this, you know, are you seeing much in the way of like switch offs actually happening yet? And, you know, again, what do you think the messaging's like around that?
I think the language around it is quite difficult for people to understand, for our residents and our businesses out there. And we're seeing less awareness, I would say, from the SME community. So as a team, we've actually got some educational animations in production now around the elements of the PCSM switch off from different perspectives and what they need to do. So we're hoping to get those out fairly soon. Like I say, we've got our teams on the ground, and each of the local authorities, again, from a telecare perspective, that seems to be in hand. But yeah, it's that wider educational piece that I think is needed.
Yeah, well, it is interesting because, as I say, you know, some of the feedback we've had is that, you know, people are a bit uncertain about what it means for them. Yeah, you're right, Heather. I think there's a bit of uncertainty about who's doing it and why, and when. Just as importantly, there's lots of questions about when. So, you know, I think it's something that is going to be a recurring theme for the next, well, certainly all of this year, I would think. Obviously, the 2G. 3G switch off will probably be the 3G element will be finished within that time frame. So I guess we'll see more quickly if there is any impact from that. But just making the most of our last few minutes then, and thanks very much, you know, for all of your, you know, really helpful insight. I'm just going to quickly have a look back through a couple of the comments and see, you know, where we've had. Where we've had feedback. So yeah, there was a comment about using 5G fixed wireless access in rural areas. I guess, Deja, that might be a good one for you, you know, given you said actually in some of these geographies there's not a one size fits all. You know, fiber might not be, you know, cost effective to get there. Fixed wireless access might not always work because of the terrain. You know, satellite might be a solution. is it that blend? You know, that
I
can
think
5G play a part in that? Do you think?
At the moment, we're using the Ofcom data as well, which shows where fixed wireless access is poor in certain areas, but that's at postcode level, which makes it quite hard then to match it up at UPRN level. So we are looking at that, but yeah, we have to look at all solutions. Unfortunately, satellite, although it's probably the most robust, is the most expensive, so it's not going to work for everybody. Yeah, it's a difficult challenge.
And I mean, that expense is an interesting question, isn't it? Because for those of us who are old like myself, you know, in the Superfast program, there was actually an affordability element to it, and it was trying to reach that kind of, you know, level playing field, you know, of not just availability but affordability. And you know, satellite clearly is a great solution for some of these properties, but you're right, it comes with it, you know, quite a high premium in terms of its monthly rental, aside from, you know, how you might voucher, for example, you know, the installation cost, the ongoing rental can be prohibitive to some people.
Just
you
to
know,
clarify on the Ofcom data, there's a column on fixed wireless access to say whether it's poor or not. So it is specific to FWA. It's not about mobile connectivity across the board.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think there is room and space for all of these solutions. It's about finding the right solution in the right place, and having that blend, and it being affordable as well as available is just as important. And I think that most of the questions were around that actually, and the comment around the 3G switch off happening, and that might, you know, add that capacity and bandwidth to the existing 4G and 5G networks. And so let's hope that's the case. Just thinking, you know, back to some of the questions around, you know, how do we keep this moving? You know, we talked about strategy, we talked about digital champions. I guess I might ask each of you just in turn, you know, if you had a wish as to what would help keep things moving in the right direction, you know, getting either mobile or fixed or both, you know, or adoption of that out, you know, what would be your silver bullet you would want? I'll start with you, Heather, because you're at the top of my screen.
Well, I think it's important because we've made significant progress, but I think it's important we don't stop there. We need to continue to drive. We need to sort of really, you know, aim for 100% coverage. Let's be ambitious here. But there's things that we need to do. We know we've got mobile hotspots in the city. We're working to look at how we can utilise our assets to maybe address some of those. There are some challenges because they're not spots, because they're difficult. There's a difficult place to site 5G masks, but we need to make sure we don't just leave it now and say, oh, well, that's done commercially. We need to keep on pushing, and we need to ensure that we get maximum coverage.
Yeah. Deja?
Just probably because I'm in it a lot at the moment, but access to data where we're not having to keep looking for different areas, having a really clear picture of where people are going. And the category we're monitoring the closest at the moment is the under review category, because they're neither in firm commercial plans or in scope for intervention. So we need to be able to see movement of that category every time we get the next set of national rolling around data. And it would be really useful to understand the non-superfast whites, and the OMR only gives us the not gigabit. So that would be helpful. Everything Heather said.
That's a good ask, and I'm sure very achievable if the right people are listening. Stacey?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Deja said. It's very much that OMR data, and working very closely with the BD UK team, because the commercial players obviously can change their mind. They're not held to term on delivering on that. It's just what they offer up at the time of ask. So we're very much at the mercy of them. And I suppose working closely and keeping an ear with central government, because especially in the BD UK stuff, when a lot of decisions and a lot of designs can be made centrally at Whitehall, and not that engagement with the local boroughs, the local communities. So just making sure that sort of that triangle of communications kept going, because what we don't want is a technology being assumed it will be taken up. So spending millions of pounds deploying something that actually culturally people might not take up. You know, people sometimes don't want a satellite link, or they don't want a wireless link. They just want fibre in the ground. So just making sure that we're working closely with central government and the money's been spent wisely.
The irony is not lost on me. Again, I'm sure I said this in the summer last year, that one of the things that's really needed the most is better communication to get this communication technology out. And that still seems to be the case after all this time. James, what do you think?
I just echo the previous points. I think for me, it's about transparency. The only way that we'll achieve the goal is if we're transparent with one another, both public and private sector, and we work in partnership to deliver. And I think the starting point for that is being open and transparent around about the data we hold, how we can use that, and how we can work together to kind of deliver this. I think I just echoing kind of Stacey's point. Some of the decisions that are kind of taken appear to be a little bit kind of isolation and lack some local context. I've said to colleagues previously, I don't necessarily want to be involved in the minutiae around about it, but locally, the local authority has representation across the region. It can bring a lot of local information and context to that. So we just like to be a seat at the table.
Yeah. And again, I'm sure I said in about the summer last year that, wherever digital connectivity is deployed, that place is in a local authority area. So those kind of, tripartisan conversations between, the market, the local authority, and, the relevant government body, whoever that might be, because it's slightly different in the different geographies, are really essential. That's where the kind of boots on the ground make all the difference. A grand plan is only deliverable if you've got that kind of local buy-in and support to help with some of the trickier challenges that come along in any deployment. That's where it happens. So we're right at the end. We've got 1 minute left. So I would just like to thank you all very much. Thanks to everyone who joined and who listened to the webinar, and thanks very much to everyone who contributed to completing the survey. Obviously, we'll be doing it again at the end of this year. So that'll be our third survey. So I'd really welcome everyone's input again. And to our panelists, just thanks again for your valuable insight. It's good to get that kind of balanced view of, very urban versus, not so urban and quite rural, and just, thinking about what that means. And as always, it's interesting to see some of those challenges are quite similar, and there are some differences as well. So thanks very much to everyone. And go and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.